thank you everyone for coming. This is a great group and a great group. First let's have all the participants introduce themselves into this blockchain business, which we're all engineers mostly, so we can see how much we know about business. So I'm Georgios. I do consulting on off-chain and layer 2 stuff, and that's about it.
Hello everyone, I guess you just saw my introduction, but I'm John. I work at Consensys doing scalability research and phase 2 of Ethereum 2.
My name is Liam. I work at a company called L4. I work on layer 2 research and development, and in my past life I've done a bunch of startup stuff.
Hello, my name is Heiden. I created Uniswap. So we're a decentralized exchange on Ethereum, and recently we launched a demo using layer 2, so we're starting to get more into layer 2 stuff.
Hi, I'm Dan Robinson. I work at a research fund, work at an investment firm called Paradigm as a research partner, and I focus on research into various things. We've invested in Uniswap. I worked on a protocol, the Yield Protocol, and Rainbow Network, but used to be a plasma researcher with these guys.
Yes, you were. Everyone, I'm Dan. I work at Plasma Group, which we did just announce right now as having launched something other than Plasma, which is very exciting, with Uniswap. I'll take this opportunity to shill myself, because what you guys don't know about Unipay, if you haven't seen it, is that it's really secretly competition between us and Heiden. So we each have tokens, and it's basically Heiden and I's job to get you guys to dump the opponent's tokens as much as possible. So I'll take this opportunity to tell you to dump Uni tokens and buy Piggy tokens.
Everybody go to unipig.exchange. Piggy's back up? Oh, 50.05. Everyone go to unipig.exchange. And what you do is you join Team Unicorn.
No.
You join Team Unicorn, and then you dump your Piggy for Uni tokens.
Yeah, Unipig is very great. Yeah, my name is Shuhei, and I'm working at Cryptoeconomics Lab. So yeah, I'm Japanese researcher of Plasma. We are focusing on the optimistic virtual machine client, and so we finished POC of Open Plasma in last month.
So, okay, this panel will have 4 questions I have written down, and we'll see how it goes. So, Dan, you started Heiden, you started a company that is arguably like very hard to monetize, and we're in a panel about business.
Yeah.
And Dan invested in this company. And again, this is a panel about business. I personally think blockchain business is a stupid term. What does it mean to be a blockchain business compared to like any traditional startup? Heiden, Dan, and then we can see about the rest.
You. Okay, yeah. I did start a blockchain business. Before starting a blockchain business, I was an engineer, so I have no experience with business. But I do think that there is value to building decentralized applications, and I think that there are probably some good monetization schemes that can be figured out. We haven't figured it out 100% yet, but we do feel very confident that we can. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem, but I think it's definitely one worth tackling. I think that there have been plenty of projects that say they're decentralized that have succeeded in making a lot of money. And is this, yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't know, I'm not too worried about it, honestly.
So I think it's worth comparing this sort of perspective of like traditional venture capital, where very often you have a business that will just sort of spend millions of dollars, like sort of Groupon type thing that just spends millions of dollars to try to like subsidize usage, or Uber, sort of like really just like bleeding red all over the world, in order to sort of just see growth in revenue. And Uniswap is actually a very sort of lean business. So the fact that they have 0 revenue doesn't actually, no, sorry, they have stock revenue.
We made $15,000 off Unisocks.
Yeah.
One second, live demo. These are Unisocks. We made $15,000 off of them.
Let's get into the technology though.
Okay. So I think it's important to know, I think like the reason why it feels like, oh, it's weird that we haven't sort of monetized this is because we're talking about this in sort of a world where a bunch of protocols monetized before they built anything. And it's just so novel to see something that built something before it monetized that everybody's just sort of in shock about it.
Is it novel or is it irresponsible?
Irresponsible to prove value before raising hundreds of millions of dollars?
No, in this case, like you want to prove that you had something,
Yeah.
and then raise the money.
Yeah, we basically wanted to prove that there was something there before raising money for it.
Then,
Uniswap is great. I'm sure they'll figure out how to make money, and it's great that they're doing things before having raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
So, Plasma Group is currently a non-profit. Is there any way to turn it into a business?
Surely, and I can say that with as much confidence and ambiguity as Heiden gave for his answer. There definitely is. I do think in general that open source is something that has historically gone underfunded, but has been funded successfully. And I think that we are likely to see in the crypto space better funding for open source than we've seen in any other industry. And there's been lots of successful open source companies, lots of very large companies, but I think that crypto will only see that be more successful. Yeah.
Give it to me.
Now, this might be a question you want to ask, but like, what are the major growth vectors that would make you think that there will be opportunities for you guys to monetize? Because it seems like, at least from our side, I think as L4 what we're working on, and also from your side, it's more like wealth redistribution, where we're just getting paid to work on stuff people need versus growing the actual industry through some novel business model. Like, so how do you think we're going to see any kind of growth vectors? And maybe, Dan, you have some thoughts on this too for Paradigm.
So I think that layer 2 has, at least so far, seems like it's been sort of slightly harder to monetize than maybe layer 1. And one of the reasons actually is that it's so sort of fabulously successful. So the cheaper you make transactions, actually, sort of the more painful potentially these fees get. Whereas on L1, it certainly feels like, you know, like MKR, even like MKR sort of like fees or Uniswap fees are sort of, you know, like they're sort of on the same level around as what gas fees are. Actually, Uniswap fees is typically higher than still. That's just because they're so efficient on gas. But yeah, so I think probably part of it is actually if you just sort of like promise people cheap transactions, then yeah, it's sort of hard to do that. But I do think as we see layer 2 get sort of more mature and more successful, that we're gonna, again, eventually I think that's gonna be an area where we can see a lot of monetization as well.
I agree. I think that the reason that we're building layer 2 is not to make cheaper transactions. Really, it's to support way more users. And so I think saying that like layer 2 is screwing themselves out of money by having cheaper fees, really what we're saying is they're giving themselves an opportunity to make money by taking a lot of smaller fees with a product that people want to use even more.
What's like the best example of a use case where there's users having at the door to use it, but because of scalability reasons they can't?
I think that, like, I don't know, that is like a thing that seems to get brought up a lot, and I kind of don't know if I fully like agree with that way of looking at it. I think that if you literally can't support that amount of users, I don't know how you can build the applications that would bring that amount of users. If that makes sense. Like, you can't build a viral dApp if we can't support the users for a viral dApp, right? You need instant transactions, you need hundreds of transactions per second for there to be any shot of a viral dApp. So I think that there can be viral applications built on layer 2, but I do think that the layer 2 needs to exist before the users, personally.
Okay, I want to counter this actually with one thing. On the topic of, oh, it seems like we don't have users, what's a layer 2 thing that has users? The #1 use of cryptocurrency today, by far, starts with an S, ends in an N. What is it? Speculation! And right now, all that speculation occurs on centralized hackable exchanges. So I think absolutely something that L2 is tailor fit for is trading your coins for other coins because you think that Moon Lambo is something. So I think that absolutely, like DEX is going to be the first layer 2 thing to take off because people are going to want to trade.
Thank you for showing that.
Yes, such as Uniswap. I mean, Uniswap is layer 1, but it was the first like DEX that gave like some semblance of centralized exchange UX, and I think that's part of why it was so successful.
So that answer was about like mainstream adoption, right? Like more generalized adoption of outside of like the crypto native people who are interested in buying crypto asset space. Why would users from outside of the space want to speculate on crypto assets that they aren't necessarily interested in?
So that was a question from Arjun Bhutani from Connext, who, more than almost anybody else on this panel, other than maybe like Liam, is actually building a business on Layer 2. So one answer, at least that I think I've seen, is earning interest on USD denominated assets in crypto is probably, it's maybe sort of the most compelling case I've seen for a while, like someone who's got no interest in just sort of like crypto as a technology, doesn't want to do anything illegal, doesn't want to do anything sort of weird, nevertheless could actually be attracted to this just by virtue of like there's an extremely weird thing going on where you can earn 10% interest on USD right now. And there's just sort of like a technological gap between actually the demand, the supply and demand of that resource. So I think one thing I say is you could say there's just like insane speculative demand for Ether by crypto heads, but that is driving a really strong demand to borrow dollars, and that's one thing that could potentially at least pull people onto the platform. But it'll be really hard to do that on chain. It's sort of inefficient. It couldn't actually support maybe the level that we'd actually want in order to bring this market in equilibrium.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I think maybe it goes both for and against that point. Is like in 2017, like my friends that didn't know anything about crypto were texting me about like which coins to buy because they wanted to get into the game, and they were exactly the users that people were like benefiting off of, and that was causing a lot of growth in the industry. So I think there's a lot of precedent of people wanting to use crypto even though they have no clue what the hell is going on with crypto. And so, yeah, I think there's something to that. But then the counterpoint to that is like, do we really need a DEX for that? Coinbase works great. I don't see the issue with it.
We have Aki.
So my question is, everybody wants to make something decentralized, right? And that's a word we hear a lot. And yet, on the business side of things, a lot of people are building very centralized corporate structures through which to do so. Now, when Satoshi, floated Bitcoin, if they had done so through a sort of like centralized way that was going to make money out of it, there is an argument that this might not have worked. Do you think that those two models are fundamentally incompatible?
The two models are that, like, do you deploy something without any tax, basically, or like any tax as in like any protocol level tax to make money, or do you just let it be and see how it grows organically, like on its own for like accruing value?
I think the question might have having like a centralized sort of essentially group behind building something, right? And so I think, well, one thing to say about that is like even Bitcoin does in fact sort of have a core group of developers. And certainly required maybe the efforts of one sort of extraordinary developer to actually get it off the ground. Most open source projects in general are not built by just sort of like random accumulations from a lot of people. They're usually built by a relatively small group of often fanatical people, and sometimes by a business that actually sort of is built as a business. That doesn't mean that it's any less decentralized. It doesn't mean that the software itself is any less free. But generally, I think we have found that the just sort of means of human organization that can actually produce something tend to involve some high level of direction, some level of coordination that you can't necessarily get in just like a decentralized community.
But Satoshi didn't make profit out of it, is what I'm saying.
Oh, profit.
A centralized set of people that build it, that's fine.
Satoshi's a billionaire.
But he's not liquidating, right? And if he did, that would create a problem for the network is set up, right?
So Satoshi Nakamoto is dead, because otherwise he probably would have sold everything. But even if not, I think he certainly could. Satoshi had a fantastic monetization model, which was you sort of start mining a cryptocurrency no one else has ever heard of until eventually everybody sort of starts mining it. I think monetization wasn't sort of a challenge for it, and even he understood this, was why he mined so many early coins, in addition to helping the network. I think one struggle is actually since then that model has become a lot harder, because like for example if you take like a cryptocurrency like Crin. Trying to do sort of like a fair mine, it was just like extremely competitive from day one. So I think that Satoshi, sort of by being so a weird pioneer in this monetization model, was by far the most successful at it.
Are there more questions from the crowd, or should we move to the next question? Great. So the clear is something happening. We have all of this technology, all of these solutions, roll-up, ZK roll-up, I don't know, word salad. Like, what is the business play that like a founder or like somebody would do like to start a company in this industry? Like, which technology do they pick? What markets do they target? Do they go for DeFi? Do they go for like custodian models? Like, what's the play here? What would you start like Dan if you were starting a business today? Yeah. Sure. What is the business play?
I have a couple thoughts. I mean, this is more like just listing off the top of my head what I'm actually observing. Like, one legitimate business play is there seem to be a lot of people that are willing to pay high rates for people to work on open source software, which for most people, like in this industry, is quite fun. Like, if you want to write Rust software that's like high performant and bleeding edge and decentralized context, like you can get paid quite a lot of money to do that. So that's a legitimate new thing you can do right now. I think you can still probably sell a token. Like, it seems like this is working for these two guys and a couple others that can build a business on top of that model. It's unclear whether it'll pan out, but there's definitely enough VCs willing to fund it. I think probably, like, finally, you can actually just raise money from VCs themselves in an equity model for one of the visionary items that they put together. There's enough money circulating that allows us to build towards the vision that we've kind of been talking about for 2 years that will sustain ourselves for now, and that's mainly where you would go. But in terms of genuinely creating revenue, the only one I think I see is exchange or software consultancy.
+1 to that.
I don't have anything to add.
I also agree with Liam, but I guess I'll add a bit more, which is that in terms of starting a business, it depends on if you want to have a job or if you want the business itself to be super successful. Because you can certainly start essentially, a software consultancy business where you get paid by people who got rich earlier from the rise of cryptocurrencies, and you essentially get paid a very good salary to implement things that the protocol needs, common goods that would otherwise not get implemented because there's almost no way to monetize them. You can get paid a very good salary like this, which is certainly a great business model if you want to get a good salary. But this doesn't really lead to a super profitable unicorn business. The other type of business that we've seen a lot launch, which is potentially a bad thing or potentially a good thing, is you basically do a token sale and launch your own chain. This happens both people launching their own chains at layer 1, or they essentially do it as something like a side chain or a payment channel network or something like this, where they have their own token, which most of these schemes have essentially kind of devolved to just being another chain. They don't really borrow any security. So to have and you can have a pretty successful business in this way if you essentially just do a token sale. Some people will disagree that this is, or that they'll say that this isn't exactly a very decentralized thing to do, or it's completely unneeded. You can just build this on top of Ethereum, and those people are probably right.
Cool. Okay, so the next question is that if there was a compelling enough business use case to push for layer 2 development, something very specific, that business would be built and the technology for it would be there. For example, we have seen Funfair develop very application specific state channels for their use case, but even in their case, the usage of them is quite small. So, does scaling even matter? Or is it just used to continue the meme of doing software, cutting edge software development?
I think scaling matters a ton. I think that the DeFi meme tends to be allowing more people to participate in finance, and I think that if you can't support them, if you can't actually process the number of transactions you need, then what's the point? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's important.
So I think you brought up an interesting point there, Georgios, which is that a lot of L2 and infrastructure plays and products that have happened as a result of blockchain have been a result of people wanting to build products on top. So I think this is something that is probably not so common in the rest of like the tech industry, where you have people building cutting edge infrastructure to support a cutting edge application on top. Like usually you have like very well focused like infrastructure plays, and then you have people building products on top of it. So I think it's interesting, and in some cases I think it's been detrimental actually to layer 2 protocol development, because when people are trying to build a layer 2 protocol solely for the sake of immediately turning around and using it to build a product, they end up cutting the scaling solution short because they have a lot of pressure and profit motives to actually build a product on top. So actually, some of that actually worries me, that people are trying to build scaling solutions at the same time as building a cutting edge application on top. This feels like too much more, biting off more than you can chew. I think we should try to be more methodical and let infrastructure people do infrastructure things and product people do product things.
So like a joint collaboration between a decentralized exchange and a layer 2 solution in order to build a automated market maker on top of layer 2, that would be a bad idea, in your opinion.
That would be a great idea, Dan. Are you kidding me? That's exactly what we want. We want people like Heiden to be able to build incredible front ends that I would not possibly be capable of doing, and I want to provide him incredible scaling solutions that I'm, tailor fit to do.
I will say that as an application developer, and we tend to be very like UX focused, we do not want to build our own custom layer 2 for Uniswap. That sounds awful. That sounds horrible. And having the reason that we were excited about optimistic rollup is because it's finally getting to the point where you can build an application on top of a generalized layer 2. Huge props to Plasma Group for all their work on it.
So you said that you wouldn't use a layer 2, you wouldn't build your own in-house layer 2 basically. So why do you think that CryptoKitties, Dapper Labs, went with creating their own layer 2?
I specifically tweeted, negatively about that. I think it was a horrible move. I mean, I don't know if it's a horrible move. It just seems like, I don't know. Maybe they have a fantastic protocol developer team. It just seems weird to build a protocol and the application layer at the same time. I think they require they're both full-time company jobs, right? Normally you don't have I don't know. It just seems like a lot. It seems inefficient.
It's a great way to raise money.
It's a great way to raise money. Yeah.
So I think is there anybody from Dapper Labs here? All right. All right.
Ian was a part-time contractor.
It was just a website.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a great website. So I do think probably one of the reasons you see this is that new layer 1 protocols is one of the most guaranteed ways to actually be able to raise some amount of funding at a $100 million plus valuation. If you just say here's a new protocol for doing this, and if you can demonstrate something that's been successful, even sort of been successful in the way that CryptoKitties was successful on Ethereum in some way. So I think it is. This is unfortunately it's an area where the technological development is sort of responding to the very strange way in which venture capital memes propagate. That said, again, I think quite possibly, this has funded a lot of development in the L1 area. And while Dapper Labs might not actually be the ones to push it through, potentially I think it is sort of spurring a lot of competition that maybe is helpful for Ethereum.
They might make some libraries that other projects.
Yeah. Actually, I won't begrudge anybody in this space actually raises money for any amount, because honestly, ultimately, a lot of this stuff is sort of just miraculous that any of it is getting funded at all. And it's really cool that we actually have people. There's been more resources put into cryptography in the past 10 years than in the 50 years before that, probably. And just sort of novel applied cryptography, into sort of all kinds of interesting areas of distributed computing. And I think, it's just a fantastic, weird place in the world we have that we can fund these strange hobbies that we have.
I want to introduce our business model. So because I didn't talk yet, so I want to introduce our business model. So we are doing business with blockchain in Japan. So we have some POC projects in with Japanese enterprises. For example, one example is electricity trading with Japanese energy company. We definitely we need layer 2 for that because the customer can't wait confirmation time on layer 1, so we need instant finality and also gasless payment. So and that's why we are researching layer 2. So yeah, we are doing business in Japan, so we can survive and we can do both business and research. Yeah. Sorry.
Nice.
I want to ask you a question about that. So you mentioned like a demo with an electricity company. So like, was there an opportunity there for you guys to each like focus on your core competencies? Like is the details of that demo such that you are allowed to focus on building the plasma, and you can sort of like offload the front end or some of the like electricity company components to them? Like is that something that you've explored? So I guess another way to say the question is, that sounds very like, so I know Shuhei very well, and he's an excellent layer 2 protocol engineer and developer. And I guess the point that I was trying to make earlier is that because I know that he's so good, I want you to be spending your time building plasma and not building, a website for an energy company. Whether or not that's what has to happen for you to be able to make money, maybe that's the case, but I'm curious about that.
Oh, actually, our company has two teams. I'm in the research team, and also he is adoption team. These are different. So also we are also working hard. Not only me, us. Yeah, we are also work.
I'm the cash cow.
They are also working hard. Yeah, we have two teams.
However, all of these things are like wealth redistribution. Like usually,
in usually these cases, the first question that you need to ask is not do you need layer 2, is do you need a blockchain? Can the Google Sheets do this better? Which usually the whole world runs on Excel, right? So at this point, like we're like kind of missing the point of like why you need a blockchain company, and we have taken a hammer and we're trying to like figure things out while it's totally the wrong tool to do this. So I wouldn't be exactly so sure about that. If you want to say something on this? Because we have 10 more minutes and I have one more question for the panelists. Cool. So the last question is starts as follows. So we took the kind of existing Silicon Valley bubble of like funding businesses without like with questionable business models, and we multiplied it by 100. And then we justified all of this with words like decentralization and token economics, which is probably going to be a term that's gonna like age very poorly. And while in fact, like most of the ways most businesses raise money, it has been via securities fraud. So where do we go from here? Like what's next? Let's say all the technological issues are fixed. What's going on? Like how do we generate value?
So if you look at sort of the early history of computing and the internet, with a couple sort of like major exceptions, and so like maybe like Intel, or like IBM is like Bitcoin and Intel is like Ethereum, you really didn't see sort of a boom in actually like sort of monetizable products. Really, maybe sort of until I guess sort of the personal computer boom, but then even just like a decade later with the internet. For the most part, there was sort of just a lot of hobbyists hacking on things. And sort of like making stuff work, and a lot of them were doing it sort of for some sort of like broader purpose. A lot of them were doing it as a labor of love, but I do think that may be the stage that we're in right now. And some of those will end up like Microsoft. I could not imagine investing in a company that was like we're building the basic for the Altair personal computer, like the language interpreters. Like that's not the kind of thing you can sort of imagine investing in early on. But at some point, one of these hobbies, like sort of gets serious enough and just takes over the world. And so I think that's sort of what venture capitalists, at least, are hoping for, is to find the one sort of like weird hobby company that in a model that never made sense before, that suddenly starts to make sense in a massive way.
I think maybe if you're like building the infrastructure, then in the future you are a prime player in using that infrastructure. For example, I can see potentially Plasma Group as an example is if they, if they succeed in building this optimistic rollup thing, and all these projects need to use optimistic rollup to scale, then being the only people who actually have implemented it and know how it works, could be very, very valuable.
Red Hat model doesn't work too well for Red Hat either.
Well, what?
Red Hat model in this case does not work very well for Red Hat.
Red Hat sold for $38 billion to IBM.
No,
After a long
I wanted to
time.
add like one separate thing.
After
like,
a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm generally like, maybe through the discussions you can tell I'm pretty pessimistic about the existing business models, about token economics, about a lot of the ways that people are trying to make money now. And the vision that we're pushing, I honestly don't think is anywhere close to where we are today. But to Dan's point, I think it's very accurate that there's something about an enormous amount of people like us here tonight gathering around some vision and making it kind of our livelihoods that can lead to something interesting coming up. And so I think it is important to keep in mind that we're not just building this technology so that we can all like get a paycheck and leave at the end of the day. We're building a community and we're building a narrative for our lives and for a lot of others that are excited about centralization and Web3, and that itself is a very useful product. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind. There are like thousands of people just like us all over the world that are, they're reading your guys' blog posts, right? Like they're following everything that's being done, and there's a reason for that. So I think that's where maybe some of these hobbyists will eventually turn into businesses, is through that crowd.
So I guess a small point, which is to address your question of how do we create value. I think right now, like you said, a lot of the money is essentially being funneled from VCs or potentially from retail investors into the hands of these new company founders that keep popping up in this kind of bubble industry. But I think the way that we can create value, or that the blockchain can provide value, is through use. If we can increase how much the blockchain is used and the quality of use, then this will it'll create value. And if there is enough value there, if there is enough use, then someone somewhere is going to find a way to tap into this and create money in a way that's legitimate, that doesn't involve just taking VC money. They'll find a way to take this use and monetize it in some ways that we may not even be able to imagine now. And this is kind of why layer 2 or scaling in general is so important, because right now blockchains just don't have enough throughput to have the use that we need to see this value being generated.
I just want to add like one other really quick point about like where we can go forward. One thing I do wish we would do is like get rid of the existing idea of like let's make a new token for everything. I think it's very short-sighted, to be honest. Like we have a lot of amazing tools in the ecosystem that are been put, like tons of work has been put into them. For example, ENS, we have the gas station network, we have a bunch of other infrastructure that honestly is not well used at the moment, that we as an industry could be working far better on in our projects versus all the time creating, like rebuilding the wheel for the 100th time for the hope of like the short-term pump. So I wish there was more focus on reusing existing tools that are out there, personally.
Yeah, I don't know. I think one way to reword this question, or one important sort of axiom that you need some corollary, is what is this usage going to be for, and what does it look like? And I think this is genuinely like actually a huge unknown. Like I have a lot of faith that blockchains are going to be used, and that's probably like almost a religious faith, and then I'm not sure what they're going to be used for. If you look at like the internet, in the early days of the internet, it was the question of how are we going to use the internet? Well, we have a newspaper, now we can put a newspaper on the screen. But the reality is that the internet wasn't transformative until we realized that it changed what a newspaper was. Instead of a newspaper is a 330-page document published by the New York Times, we said it's a 130-character document published by anyone at any time. And so I think that one of the problems here is that we don't know what blockchains are going to be used for yet, because we don't know what the new use cases are and what's going to make them interesting. So I honestly, in some ways, just sometimes hunker down and say, well, someone will figure it out. Someone will make the Twitter equivalent of money, and things will go well.
I don't remember what the question was. But I just want to say this. This is one of my. I think this is where maybe we're hitting the end. This is one of my favorite panels I've ever been on with all you guys.
Sure, lots of friends on this panel.
They usually don't let me drink this much right before a panel.
Yeah.
That was a question from Arjun.
I can just talk louder. One thing you mentioned was like, in the future we don't really know what blockchains will be used for, and so there will definitely be all sorts of radical new models that we can't even conceive of right now. The main difficulty, I think, is like, how do we get there? Because there has to obviously be enough continued business success for people to continue pouring money into this industry, and that's definitely something that still happened even in the early days of the internet case, where there were still people who did, okay, let's just take this and put it on the internet, just like, let's just take this and put it on the blockchain, and then they succeeded, and then they made a bunch of money. In what ways do you think, like, having this kind of hybrid model where you take an existing centralized business or existing centralized business model and then couple it with a decentralized infrastructure model could work? And like, in what ways do you think, both like in terms of the like reaction from the community, and also in terms of like just the possibility of it, can you have models which are both open and closed source at the same time?
2 minutes.
Sorry.
2 minutes. So if one wants to take the question, that's all our time. That's very good.
I mean,
I almost want to hear your answer.
I'm curious what you guys think.
I'll just reiterate that I think the key to this whole thing is that we don't really know what the hell is going to happen in the future.
I'm saying right now, like, because we have to do something now to get there.
Right now, continue taking money from people like Dan who are making the big bets so that we don't have to. I mean, realistically, right? Like, there was a huge crash in the early days of the internet, but what fell out of that was a massive amount of infrastructure that was eventually used to rebuild and build genuine products that actually changed the world.
I like taking money from Dan, and then using that to try to build decentralized applications. So I have no complaints.
One more answer and we're done.
Yeah, so one just quick thing I'm going to mention is that, you guys are just 2 guys, but there's, like I said earlier, there's thousands and thousands of people all over the world that are built, that are bought into this vision and that can be activated. And one thing that I've, myself and some of my friends put together is this thing called ETH Global, which has been running Ethereum hackathons all over the world. We usually get like 300 to 600 hackers all over the place. South Africa, Singapore, San Francisco, obviously, New York, and Paris, like all over the place. And people are always, just like this room, so enthusiastic about this stuff. I would recommend going to these events, building stuff, making friends with them, and just growing the overall size of the ecosystem. Because the more people like these two that get really excited and find Dans to put money in their pockets, the faster we'll iterate in this ecosystem versus just relying on these guys.
So this is a very optimistic panel in the end. I'm very glad that I did not kill all you guys' enthusiasm. So thank the panelists for all their time and their insights. And we will be wrapping this up. Thank you very much.